Well, hi there. I'm here today with Gus Gus. I mean, his picture's right here. He's like the star of our whole channel. Because we want to talk to you about giant pet reptiles. And Gus Gus is definitely what I would consider to be a giant pet reptile. He just blows everyone away whenever I pull him out, because this is a serious lizard. But as it turns out, on this particular list of 5 of the best giant pet reptiles that you could possibly get, he's the smallest of the 5. You're gonna want to stay tuned for this one. Reptiles are rad. Full stop. They are just awesome. Especially when you get up close and you really check them out and look at the details and the amazing little things that they're doing. But some reptiles can grab your attention from all the way across the room. And those are the giants. Giant reptiles are definitely not for everyone. Many of them, perhaps the majority of them, make truly horrible pets. But some of them, despite the issues that come with being a giant reptile, are really excellent pets, at least for those people who are willing and able to deal with the difficulties that come with enormous body size. To be on this list, first of all, it must have that "holy cow, it's huge" factor, which Gus Gus has. And on top of that, it still needs to be, at least for a huge reptile, a fairly reasonable pet to keep. Like I said before, giant reptiles are not particularly reasonable, but it needs to be reasonable for a giant. And that is why first on our list is the animal that I consider to be really the ultimate giant pet lizard. Though, as we have already mentioned, on this list, he's puny. Let's start with the pros. His size. This is an incredible size for a reptile. He's big. I mean, there is no question that he's big. You pull him out and everyone in the room is blown away, because many of them, at least when they were close enough to touch it, have never seen a reptile, at least a lizard, this big before. Despite being really quite large, impressively large, they're actually fairly manageable to handle. I describe him as being sort of like maybe a medium-sized dog to handle, in that you can pick him up and he's kind of okay with that, but the best way to interact with him is usually when he's walking around on the ground. Because like when you get to be a lizard this size, these claws, for example, you feel them, right? And if you did upset him and he bit you, it'd be serious. And these are just some of the issues that come along with being big. We'll talk more about that in a minute. At this size, one of the great things about him is that even though he's big, he's not gonna kill you. When we're talking about giant reptiles, the ability to kill you actually becomes a factor. And Gus Gus, he could hurt you, right? He could send you in for some stitches, but he's not gonna kill you, and that's lovely. Tegus also have just a really terrific personality, at least the Argentine Tegus. I'm definitely not speaking on behalf of the Columbian Tegus, but Argentine black and white Tegus like Gus Gus have just probably the best personality of any lizard, at least any interactive lizard. They're just marvelous. I mean, look at this. They're so special. I honestly, for a long time, thought of them as almost being like kind of different looking monitor lizards, but their personality is completely different from that of monitors. It's actually, I can only describe it as being a lot like a dog. They're far more like a dog than they are like any other lizards I've really interacted with. They're also very intelligent. It's kind of questionable the way that we often assess the intelligence of animals, but the Tegu, especially the Argentine black and white Tegu, is widely considered to be one of the most intelligent of all lizards, if not the most intelligent of all lizards, though I think there are a number of varanids, the monitor lizards, that might give them a run for their money. As I've already described, I mean, they're a lot like a lizard dog, but one of the differences between them and a dog is that they don't need the level of attention that a dog needs. You know, I can go a day or two without looking at Gus Gus, and he doesn't mind. Your dog would hate that. They've got an omnivorous diet, which is primarily comprised of things that you can get at the grocery store, like eggs and fruits and vegetables and ground turkey, and that is very, very convenient for most people. In my opinion, the Argentine black and white tegu is the most worthwhile pet lizard there is. I mean, there are a lot of lizards that are a lot easier, but as far as just pure enjoyment balanced by the level of difficulty, this is the ultimate. I love them. But they are not perfect. And they are, in my opinion, possibly the greatest pet lizard there is, but they still have their cons. And those can be a deal breaker for a lot of people. One of them is that they're big. Everything on this list is big, and we've already explained this is the smallest animal on this list. But this is still just way too big for most keepers. Because it is this big, it can hurt you, right? He's got weapons that can really pack a wallop. Those claws, and especially that mouth and that tail even. He could hurt you if he wanted to. And sometimes even if he doesn't. Whoa. I'm gonna get you down, Gusserton. Roll over, good boy. They're a handful. They eat a lot. You know, it's easily accessible food, but I mean, they eat a lot of it. Speaking of they can hurt you, ouch. That was a claw. He didn't mean to hurt me, but when a lizard is this big, it just can. The enclosure that they need is enormous. Almost certainly needs to be custom built. And, you know, that is something that is going to be common for all of the lizards on this list, because lizards need a lot of space for their body size, and when lizards are this size or bigger, that enclosure is just colossal. They also can drop their tail, which is something I never like in a lizard, and it is something that tegus can do. It's not something they're really likely to do, especially as adults, but it does happen. I've seen it happen many times. They also need relatively expensive lighting. They need heat and UVB lighting, and just being such a large-bodied lizard, you're gonna need a lot of bulbs. And last but not least, I mean, they need a heck of a lot of substrate. I mean, you're gonna be buying substrate probably at the hardware store, because you're just gonna need, you know, it's an enormous enclosure, and you need deep substrate that they can dig into and burrow into that'll hold its form and not cave in on them. It's a lot of substrate. They're not perfect, but this might be the greatest pet reptile and the best giant pet reptile there is. Next on our list of 5 of the best giant pet reptiles you could possibly get is the BCI boa, also known as the common boa or the Columbian boa, though not all of them come from Colombia. This particular individual is Ember, who is my Central American boa. As such, she stays a little bit smaller than BCIs can get. I have a female BCI who's growing up, but they are great big snakes. As you're gonna find out here in a minute, snakes get a heck of a lot bigger than this, but when I pull her out at about 7 feet, she amazes everyone in the room. And BCIs can even get bigger than this. They've definitely got that, wow, look at the size of that snake factor, but one of the big pros about them is that they don't have that, wow, it actually might kill you factor. This is a snake that is small enough that, you know, as long as you're in decent physical condition, you can probably safely handle it by yourself, and that even if things go quite awry, you might need a few stitches, so you might need to go to the emergency room, possibly, but you're not going to have to go to the coroner, and that's excellent. I think that these snakes are just the absolute perfect size for handling. It is the most immersive snake handling experience you can really have. When you start handling snakes that are any bigger than BCIs, it starts to become more of a workout and a battle than it is an enjoyable experience, because the snakes get so heavy and they're so strong that you're just trying to figure out who's going to win the wrestling match. With a BCI, they're just big enough that they give you kind of a full upper body hug. And it is just a feeling unlike anything you've ever experienced. I love them, but they're still small enough that you're largely in control. They have a very good disposition. I'm not gonna say a great disposition like a ball python or something. I trust boas a little bit less than I trust ball pythons. I'm careful with who I hand a boa. You know, I make sure that they understand about not coming at their face, and you know, and I keep an eye on their behavior because they can bite. They're not super likely to do so, but it's not only are they a little bit more likely to bite than a ball python, the bite would be considerably more severe if they did bite somebody, just because it's a larger snake with larger teeth. One thing that's really great about them, this will make more sense in a moment, but they don't need to eat farm animals. Yeah, that's what happens with this list. Stay tuned, you're gonna wanna watch the whole thing. And they eat like boas. I've talked about this before in our full video on boas, but boas tend to be great feeders. And so, you know, usually when I talk about how well a snake eats, I liken it unto a boa if it's a fantastic feeder, and boas eat like boas. Shocking that. For a giant pet reptile, they're actually fairly inexpensive to feed. And this is a big deal because most of the things on this list cost a lot to feed. These guys are only going to need to eat once a week to maybe every couple of weeks, depending on how old the snake is. And the feeders that you'll feed to them aren't going to cost you an arm and a leg, which is not true for everything on this list. Being a snake, and a fairly easy to keep snake, they're very low maintenance. Snakes in general tend to be fairly low maintenance, and these guys are great as far as that goes. Because snakes don't need quite as much space for their length as do most lizards, a boa, even though it gets big, they'll actually still be able to be housed in commercially available housing, enclosures and racks, and that's awesome. This is honestly probably the most reasonable giant on this entire list of awesome giant pet reptiles. But despite being a reasonable giant, they do have their cons. I mentioned before that they're not going to kill you, and that's definitely a pro. They're also unlikely to send you to the hospital. But that said, I still don't want to be bitten by a boa. Not at all. And they can be moody at times. You know, Ember, I bring her to do a lot of programs, but sometimes she's just not in the mood for it, and I have to call an audible and pick somebody else. They also love food, which is great. Like, that's a fantastic thing about them, unless they think you're feeding them when you go to get them out. So you have to be very careful about that, because they sometimes are going to come out of their enclosure ready to be fed, and if the only thing to grab is you, that's a bad deal. The animals that they eat are kind of charismatic animals that actually make pretty good pets themselves, like rats and rabbits. And so, you know, if you're not prepared to feed something like that to a snake, boas are definitely not for you. In fact, none of the snakes on this list are going to be for you. And while both the animal and the enclosure are fairly inexpensive for this particular list, it's still a really expensive enclosure. So cheap for a giant pet reptile is still an expensive animal to keep. Next on our list is the Sulcata tortoise, which among its pros would be the fact that it is, by a long way, the least dangerous animal on this list. They're very personable, actually. This is Big Daddy, and he's my Sulcata tortoise, and he is not fully grown. They get much, much larger than this. They're the third largest tortoise in the world, and the largest tortoise that doesn't live on an island. So, they're also probably the largest tortoise that you can get your hands on very easily. Big Daddy, because he's an enormous tortoise, he has a colossal enclosure. And it's an enclosure that I can't actually climb all the way inside of. And even if I could, I mean, I guess I could get in there, but I wouldn't be able to pull him out. The only reason that he ever comes to filming or to animal presentations or just to go out and explore in the yard is because when I come to the front of the enclosure, he comes over to greet me. They're very, very personable animals, which is awesome. For a tortoise, they're actually very easy to feed, which is the only reason that this animal is reasonable at all to keep as a pet, because their primary diet consists of grass. That's their staple. And so in the winter, for example, you're going to be feeding them mostly hay, and then supplementing that with other vegetables and things from the grocery store. If they ate only grocery store vegetables, they would cost a fortune to feed, because this is a very large animal, but hay is actually pretty darn affordable, probably depending on where you live. As we mentioned before, they're definitely more available than other giant tortoises. They're the third largest in the world, but the two bigger ones are going to be very difficult to ever get your hands on, and it's probably good that it's that way. And something that I've definitely noticed about Big Daddy is they're a great way to share your love of reptiles with your neighbors. You know, if you show up in your front yard with any of the other animals on this list, your neighbors are very, very concerned. If you show up in your front yard with your giant tortoise, it's the cutest thing they've ever seen, and they gather around and they love it. And, you know, after people get used to the fact that you've got a giant tortoise, maybe they can get used to the other stuff you've got in your basement. But this is a good icebreaker. They do definitely have some cons, though. For starters, they're very powerful and difficult to contain. Big Daddy here, he's closing in on about 50 pounds. They get, you know, way over 100 pounds potentially. I recently came across an experience. Somebody was reporting that their 75-pound tortoise had just pushed over a refrigerator. And as such, a lot of times if your enclosure that you'll probably need to build for them, if you build it and it's not strong enough, they can break right through the side of it. They're just very, very powerful animals. Another thing about them is that they are likely to outlive you. This is an animal that is going to live for many, 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 many decades. And so it is a serious commitment when you get a giant tortoise. Also, and you notice this a little bit, I took in Big Daddy as a rescue, and he's got a little bit of what you'd call pyramiding, which is just where the shell isn't perfectly smooth and it pyramids up a little bit. His is pretty minor actually for a tortoise with pyramiding, but that can be indicative of imperfections in their care, and their care can be a little bit specific as far as the UV and nutrition that they're getting. If they're growing too quickly because they're getting too much protein in their diet, there are just a lot of things that can lead to this pyramiding, and it can be a heck of a lot more severe than this. They're also, as I've demonstrated to some degree today, they're a little bit difficult to manipulate just because they're so big and heavy. And as I said, Big Daddy's still small. You know, right now I can pick him up and move him around, and it's a workout, but you know, it's handleable. You know, when he's 2 times this size or even bigger than that, it's going to be considerably harder to move him around. And that's just one of the things that comes with a giant tortoise. We'll include links to all the videos about every single one of these animals, both as a playlist right there and down in the description. Next on our list of 5 of the best giant pet reptiles is the black-throat monitor. This one that we have with us here today is Oscar, and he comes to us from Utah's Reptile Adventures, and he is not even fully grown. I mean, he is already what I would consider to be a great big lizard. I mean, he's similar in weight to Gus Gus, who we've already seen, but he's longer than Gus Gus. And Gus Gus is getting pretty close to being a fully grown Argentine black and white Tegu. This guy is about 1/3 of the weight that he will be as an adult. He's gonna get so big. This is an enormous lizard. Tegus generally look like very impressive lizards, but if you put an adult Tegu next to an adult black-throat monitor, it looks like a baby. One of the great pros of the black-throat monitor is that they have a great personality. Honestly, when you're talking about giant pet reptiles, if they don't have a great personality, there is no chance that they're going to make any sort of a list of great pets, because they're going to be a nightmare. They look super cool. One of the coolest looking animals on the planet. I mean, where to begin? They've got this chunky, robust head from an Allosaurus, which, I mean, not too many cooler animals have ever existed than Allosaurus, so they got the head of an Allosaurus. They've got the osteoderms of a crocodile. They've got the hands and claws of, well, I mean, these claws are probably pretty much straight off of a grizzly bear. The hands are off of the terrestrial crocodiles of the ancient past. They've got the basic monitor body build, which includes positive pump breathing. Most lizards can't run and breathe at the same time, but monitors can. The reason that other lizards can't breathe and run at the same time is because they use the same muscles to run that they use to breathe, so they can do either or, but not both. Monitors, however, can push air with their throat down into their lungs and breathe even while they're running, so they can run down things that otherwise a lizard would not be able to chase. They're just stupendously cool looking animals. They don't need a pond, which, I mean, there is another great giant pet monitor. I mean, as great as a giant monitor can be as a pet, being the Asian water monitor, but those need a huge pond, and that is a serious con. These guys only needing a big heavy water bowl, by contrast, that's a huge pro. They eat vertebrate prey, which, you know, another big but not colossal monitor that a lot of people will be like, why isn't this on the list, is the Savannah monitor. And the Savannah monitor is a close relative of the black-throat monitor, but it is primarily going to be eating invertebrates. And it's still a big monitor, and it has a high metabolism, like monitors do, and it will eat you out of house and home in invertebrates. And so most people don't provide them the diet that they need. Most people try to feed them using vertebrates, and they end up getting fatty liver disease and dying. These guys, being a bigger monitor in the wild, are hunting and eating vertebrates. And as a result, they are adapted to that diet, and they will do much better on that diet. They're also fairly available captive bred. I mean, it's not easy to find one, but they're out there. You can get yourself a captive bred black-throat monitor, and being captive bred is always a huge pro. The fact that Savannah monitors should be fed mostly invertebrates, and we often feed them vertebrates, is a place that we know what we should be doing and we mess it up. But the truth is, with Savannah monitors, we don't exactly know what to do to take care of them right. And that's why we haven't had very much success with captive breeding, and we certainly don't seem to be getting very long lifespans out of them in captivity. The same is not true for black-throat monitors. We have a pretty good idea how to take care of these guys in captivity. The harsh reality, though, is just that it is really intense, because this is an enormous, active, fast metabolism in a colossal lizard package. And that brings us to the cons. It is enormous. Even for a list of giant pet reptiles, these guys are giants. I mean, this guy, who is a 1/3 full size, is huge. This is a serious handful of a lizard, and he's only getting started. Being huge, they are dangerous. I mean, you know, this lizard right now at 1/3 full size, if he decided to turn on me, which they usually don't because they're great, but if he does, and they can and will, it's going to be horrific. It's going to be so bad. I mean, you know, emergency room for sure. They're expensive to keep. Very, very expensive. I mean, the lizard's expensive to buy, but not compared to the cost of keeping it. That enclosure, the lighting you're gonna need, the food budget for it, it's just incredibly expensive to keep a black-throat monitor. This is the most expensive reptile on this entire list of colossal pet reptiles, and none of them are cheap. This one's a fortune. They're gonna need an entire room in your house. I mean, unless you've got just like giant lecture halls of rooms, you're gonna need to give an entire room to this lizard. They eat a ton, and I already mentioned the cost of this, but you've also got to find it. I mean, you've got to have like whole vertebrate prey in just huge quantities for these guys. And then, as I mentioned before, their lighting is really expensive. UVA, UVB, and just so much of it, because the enclosure for these guys is just immense. Just so huge. Nothing on this list of 5 of the best giant pet reptiles is for everyone. I mean, giant pet reptiles are just not for everyone. This one is certainly not for everyone, but if what you want is a really incredibly large lizard, this is probably the best pet giant lizard that there is. Last, but in no way, not even close to anyway least, actually probably the most of any of our giant pet reptiles on this list of 5 of the best giant pet reptiles you could possibly get is the Burmese python. There are actually a lot of pros to the Burmese python. First would be the size. This snake is a true giant. I mean, earlier on this list, we talked about a snake that is impressively large. That's why it was big enough to be on this list. This is a whole other league of huge. A boa is impressively large right up until you see it next to a giant snake like a Burmese python. These guys are going to be many, many times the size of a boa. And if what you want is an absolutely colossal snake, you can't do much better than this. They also have a really great disposition. There is no other giant snake that is as mellow and mild-mannered as the Burmese python. And when you are talking about a giant snake, you are talking about a snake that literally is powerful enough to overpower and kill you. And in many cases, at least attempt to eat you. Giant snakes usually are not particularly good at actually succeeding in eating you, but they give it a go from time to time, at least in the wild. And so a great disposition is absolutely priceless when it comes to giant snakes, and these guys have one of the best attitudes of any snake there is. Their care is actually relatively simple. I mean, it's very much like the care of other commonly available pet snakes. I mean, in many ways, just basically like a ball python, or even a lot like a corn snake, just way bigger. And the enclosure that they need, even though it's going to be big, because the snake, I mean, these snakes can get upwards of about 20 feet and over 200 pounds. I mean, they can get just absolutely enormous. So the enclosure is by no means small, but compared to a lizard that is anywhere close to that big, this enclosure is going to be very, very affordable and reasonably sized. Even potentially available, you know, commercially bought. You might not even have to build it yourself. But there are cons. In fact, you know, there are some serious cons to the Burmese python. While I think this is one of the best giant, it's probably the best giant pet snake that you can get, and one of the best giant pet reptiles you can possibly get, it's still something that I would not recommend to most people. And the biggest reason for that is because they're huge. They are just absolutely huge. I said that was a pro before, and it is. I mean, if you want a giant pet snake, this is a giant pet snake. But there are so many cons that come along with being enormous. One of those is that they're actually dangerous. And we talked about this before. You know, these guys have a great disposition, so they're much less dangerous than are the other giant snakes, but it could still kill you. It could still kill you, especially if you're interacting with it alone, handling it while you are alone, if you're trying to feed it while you're alone. If there's not somebody there to save your life, if the snake wraps you up and overpowers you, because it can, you're taking a serious risk. Even a bite, even if it's not lethal, can do significant damage. They've got big teeth, and those are gonna damage some stuff. They also need huge food. I mean, as babies, they're as reasonable to feed as any other snake that's 4, 5, 6, 7 feet long. You know, they're going to eat mice and rats, maybe moving on to guinea pigs and rabbits, and then, of course, chickens and sheep, pigs. I mean, you know, like, you get into farm animals. You need access to dead, young farm animals. And, or at least a heck of a lot of slightly more available farm animals, like rabbits and chickens. That's not cheap, and that's not particularly easy to find. And, you know, I mean, big farm animals like that can be a little bit more charismatic and sadder to feed to a giant snake than are mice and rats, for example. Though I like mice and rats also. I said that enclosure and everything that you're going to need to furnish that enclosure are not big compared to a comparably sized lizard. That doesn't change the fact that they're huge and they're expensive. This is a really, really, really big snake, and you can't ethically house it in something that isn't pretty darn big. And really big enclosures are expensive, and everything that goes inside of those is expensive as well. I mean, you know, in a lot of ways, this is like a ball python, except 20 feet long. And whereas a ball python, everything that you need for it is fairly cheap, a Burmese python, everything that you need for it is going to be pretty spendy. And so, you know, that is why they're not for everyone. There are many cons to them. But, I mean, if a giant pet snake is for you, there's none more reasonable than this still quite unreasonable pet snake. And that rounds out our list of 5 of the best giant pet reptiles. You know, clearly, giant pet reptiles across the board are not for everyone. And there are degrees of giant. So, as cool as all these reptiles are, because these are clearly 5 of the coolest pet reptiles in the entire world by miles. They're so rad. I cannot think of very many reptiles that are even in the league of any of these 5. But they're not for everyone, right? Just because something's really cool doesn't necessarily mean that you want to have it for the next couple decades. And it might be something that you need to find a way to interact with it for an afternoon, and then you'll get it out of your system. It could even be that what you really want is something that's similar, but a lot smaller. And there are so many of these types of reptiles. So please check out our lists upon lists of other great pet reptiles as well. And definitely don't dive into a giant pet reptile unless you know for sure that it is the right choice for you. As always, like and subscribe. Be sure to click that little bell. Thank you to those of you on Patreon that support us and make awesome videos like this possible. And we hope to see you real soon. Like eggs and fruits and vegetables. Nice death roll, Gus Gus. Are you a good dude? You're the best. Roll over. Good boy. Just a little known fact. Our original table was supported on top of cans of soup. After that, we moved on to this table, which I purchased at a yard sale because we're fancy like that.
Cans of soup. Anytime you bumped that thing, or a snake would wrap around a leg, it would just come crashing. Oh, Gus Gus, you okay?
He just shook his head, but I wasn't watching him, so that's a little scarier one. Oh, you're such a dude. Why are you such a dude? Come here, buddy. Are you my dude? Are you my dude, my super lizard? Okay. You ready for this? You ready to get going? Is that your spot? Is that your spot? Oh yeah, now I got you. Now I got you, don't I? Oh yeah, you like that. Oh, not so much, I guess. Not so much. Had you had enough? Oh, does that feel good? Are you a good giant lizard? What do you think about that, Gusserton? Huh? What do you think about that?
It's kind of triggering my ASMR.
Just about anything with